Hi, I'm Scott with BibleStudying.net. One of the most valuable assets we have as Christians is the reliability of the New Testament. In some of our other studies, we've talked about the superiority of the New Testament to other ancient historical documents in terms of several factors, in terms of the number of the manuscripts we have, the close proximity of the time between the manuscripts, the writing of the manuscripts, and the original events and figures that they record, and also in terms of the quality of the witnesses, that the eyewitnesses actually are the authors of the New Testament accounts. What we want to do in this study is actually talk a little bit about the process of the canonization of the New Testament. When we talk about canonization, we're talking about the New Testament as a collected set of books, of a specific 27 books, and their use as a scripture or as authority for teaching and for refuting false doctrine. So the first and I guess most important point on that is that all of the New Testament books were written before the year 100 AD. That's the general consensus of scholarships based on internal information from the text, as well as historical references from the early church. And so when we talk about canonization, we're not talking about when were the original books written individually, but when were they collected together and distributed to the church, and when were they viewed as the church as equal to the scripture of the Old Testament in terms of their authority, as I said, for teaching the truth and for refuting sound doctrine, refuting false doctrine. So the story, or the conventional view that's out there today, is that the official collection of the New Testament books, the 27 books that we have today, was declared at some point in the 4th century. And there's a few landmarks there. There's the Council of Hippo, the Council of Carthage, and then also a letter from Athanasius, which provide all the same 27 books that we have today in declaring these to be the New Testament and authoritative. So this is some 300 years, plus or minus, from the writing of the originals by the apostles and other New Testament authors. Let's take a look a little bit at the history and some biblical information to see if we can get a better idea of what was taking place in those 300 years in terms of the collecting of the New Testament books, and they're being viewed as an authority for us. And so we're going to move immediately away from the, let's say, the middle of the 300s AD, where it's generally held that these councils and these letters declared the New Testament books to be authoritative for us as a list, and we're going to cut that in half. We're going to move back to about 170 or 180 AD, much closer already, 150, 200 years closer to the actual events of the New Testament and the writing of the New Testament books themselves. And at about that time, at about 170 or 180, we have 2 or 3 authors that or texts that we're going to use historically to give us some information about the New Testament, what the status was of it at that point. And of course, if you've read the early church writers from the first 200 or 300 years, you know that they quote extensively and repeatedly from the New Testament to the point where you could probably reconstruct, I think it said, 95 to 98% of the New Testament just from their works. So what we're going to do is look at some of these authors who exhibit quotes or references specifically to all of the books, or a majority of the books in the New Testament, to show that the collection had already occurred at that point in history. And so again, we're at about 170. Let's use that sort of as our marker. And so at about 170, there is a document known as we have today called the Moratorian Fragment. It is in fact a copy of a Greek manuscript listing for us the New Testament texts that were or the books, let's say, that were part of the New Testament at that time. I'm going to read some historical data on this, and as we do, keep in mind these questions that we're looking at. Who collected the 27 books? Who authorized them? When were they starting to be used as an authority or scripture? Or who authorized them to be used as an authority or scriptural authority, let's say? And as I said, when was this done? So, and then also we might ask, why was it that the 4th century councils had to make declarations, a list of what the New Testament books were? And so we're going to take a look now again at the Moratorian Canon at about 170, and this fragmented paper called the Moratorian Fragment has this list. It's called the Moratorian Canon, or list of books. And in fact, in this list, we have 22 of the 27 books of the New Testament. They're at about 170. The only books not being included in this list are James, 3 John, Hebrews, and 1st and 2nd Peter. And so here's a quote from Britannica on this. It says, "The first clear witness to a catalog of authoritative New Testament writings is found in the so-called Moratorian Canon, a crude and uncultured Latin 8th century manuscript translated from a Greek list written in Rome at about 170 AD. Though the first lines are lost, Luke is referred to as the third book of the Gospel. The canon therefore then contains Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Paul's 13 letters, Jude, 2 letters from the Apostle John, and Revelation. And so we can see that that's 22 of the 27 books. And it includes all of the major books, some of the smaller epistles not being included, and also Hebrews not being included in that list. But we don't have to stop with the Muratorian canon. About that same time, Irenaeus, the disciple of Polycarp, who was discipled by John the Apostle, Irenaeus being the bishop of Lyons, he's writing in about 180. And he's actually, in his works, extensive works on Gnosticism and refuting that theology, lists and references and quotes the New Testament books for us. And in fact, if we were to look at his writings, we would find that he also refers to 22 of the 27 books of the New Testament. And the books that he doesn't list specifically or mention specifically are James, Hebrews, Jude, 3 John, and 2 Peter. So all of the substantial books there in Irenaeus' writings. And this is a quote again from Britannica, by the end of the 2nd century, Irenaeus uses the 4 canonical Gospels, 13 letters of Paul, 1 Peter, and 1st and 2nd John, and Revelation, and also the book of Acts. So pretty similar list. They're not exactly identical, but this is 22 again of the 27 books. More importantly, as we survey his work, Irenaeus' work, we can see some important facts regarding the idea of the canonization of the New Testament. Number one, as he writes, he continues to appeal to these books as he's writing a broad theological exposition on Gnosticism, and he's tracing the history of the church, and he's talking about how he's using these references to the New Testament and quoting them as if they're widely known by his audience. That's important. It demonstrates the widespread nature of the New Testament's distribution at that point, and the fact that he has so many of them shows that collection of at least the 22 books that he's mentioning was widespread in the church and the world at that time, throughout the world at that time, and then it was considered to be authoritative because he's using it to refute Gnosticism, which is similar to what we do today when we use the Bible as an authority. And so that's important. And the other thing is that he mentions that, and let me read a quote from him on that actually. This is from Book 3 of his work against heresies. He says, "We have learned from none others the plan of our salvation than from those through whom the gospel has come down to us, which they did at one time proclaim in public," he's talking about the apostles here, "and at a later period by the will of God they handed down to us in the scriptures to be the ground and the pillar of our faith." And so he's talking about the church receiving from the apostles being these scriptures that they wrote, and he's calling them scriptures. And he also mentions something else that's important here. He mentions how the Gnostics were in fact detracting from the New Testament canon. In other words, the New Testament collection was so widespread that the Gnostics had it, and they were trying to figure out ways to deal with it. So I'm going to pause there for a second. We'll come back to that in the next portion of our video on this study, and we'll pick up with Irenaeus and what he has to say about the Gnostics and what that tells us about the New Testament canon.